Thank you. You may be seated. Please raise your right hand. You swear affirm to tell the truth and nothing but the truth under penalty of law?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated. Please state your name for the record and spell both your first and last name.
My first name is Rocky, R-O-C-K-Y. My last name is Edwards, E-D-W-A-R-D-S.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Mr. Edwards, would you please tell the jury what you do for a living?
I am a forensic firearm and tool mark examiner.
Where do you work?
I'm currently a consultant to the Stockton Police Department, and I'm retired from the United States Army and also from the Santa Ana Police Department.
Have we asked you to do an independent analysis of the ballistics evidence in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Before we get to that, your opinions on those, can you tell the jury a little bit about your training and experience in this area, the area of ballistics and forensics?
Yes, ma'am. My formal education includes a Bachelor of Science degree, heavily laden in courses in criminal justice. I'm a retired special agent with the United States Army Criminal Investigation Division. During my time as a special agent, I worked all aspects of different crimes such as homicides, sex crimes, undercover narcotics, and white-collar crime. And then I applied to and was accepted to the United States Army Criminal Investigation Laboratory at Fort Gillem, Georgia. And there I trained specifically in the science of firearm and tool mark identification. During my training there, I was trained heavily in microscopic comparisons as well as firearms functionality and ammunition components. During my training, I was sent to the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Sciences in Dallas, Texas, where I trained in advanced techniques, and was also sent to the Letterman Army Medical Center at the Presidio, where I trained in firearms injuries. From there, I went to the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, where I trained in firearms injuries, and I was also sent to most of the major manufacturers of ammunition, gunpowder, and firearms manufacturers throughout the United States, where I trained in the factories and learned their manufacturing techniques. I was also sent to different internships with Milwaukee Police Department and also in Dallas, Texas.
Your Honor, can we just have a break up in the narrative? All right, just
Say it again, sir.
asking some questions.
Okay, so
Yes.
let's just ask the state to break it down into categories as far as your question.
What did you do next after you completed that training?
I went to Germany, worked as a forensic firearms examiner, supporting our troops in Somalia, Desert Storm, and Yugoslavia. I retired from the United States Army and went to the LAPD, where I worked as a consultant for 3 years.
Let me stop you. Where did you go after that?
Santa Ana Police Department,
What did you do at the Santa Ana Police Department?
forensic firearm and tool mark examiner for 20 years. And then 2 weeks ago, I retired from there, and I am a consultant to the Stockton Police Department now.
Have you ever testified in court in the area of forensics and ballistics identification?
Yes, ma'am.
Approximately how many times?
I say in excess of 600 times.
Thank you. Your Honor, at this time, the state offers Rocky Edwards as a forensic expert in forensic examination ballistics identification and firearm and tool mark analysis.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor. There you go.
Please serve by the state.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Edwards, can you tell us generally first the process of performing a firearm/ballistic analysis? What does that mean? What are you trying to do?
Well, when I'm doing a firearms examination, I'm looking at firearms and their functionality. I'm also doing microscopic comparisons of fire bullets in cartridge cases, comparing those to each other, as well as to submitted firearms that are submitted during the process of the investigation. So that's basically my job, is to look at the evidence and see what that evidence tells me as regards to the evidence in that case.
Right. Are you trying to match a specific bullet to a specific firearm?
Yes, ma'am. Basically, the foundation for the firearms identification is that a firearm is a specialized tool, and it's a hard surface. It's made of steel or different components. And marks from those tools are placed on softer objects such as a fire cartridge case or a fire bullet, and it reproduces. And so based on that reproducibility, then it enables me to identify fired cartridge cases or fired bullets back to specific firearms.
We'll get into the specifics of how you do that in a minute. But what is the first thing you do when you receive a bullet that has penetrated into a body to try to determine whether or not it matches a specific firearm?
Well, first of all, it depends. I want to look at the class characteristics. There's 3 different characteristics I look for in a comparison. Class characteristics, which is a characteristic that is determined by the manufacturer at the time they make the suspected firearm, or the firearm that was suspected in the shooting.
I'm going to back you up there. I'm sorry to interrupt you. But before you even get there, do you have to first wash off the bullet?
Well, once I look at the bullets, if I determine that there's blood on the bullet, or if there's tissue, body tissue or something like that on the bullet, then I will clean the bullet prior to any examination.
How does any body tissue or blood on a bullet interfere with your ability to do a comparison?
Well, it's like having a blanket on the bed. You got to pull that blanket back to be able to see what's on the bed. So blood is very difficult to get off a bullet sometimes. There's different chemicals you can use, such as Hemasol, or you can use soap and water, warm soap and water with a brush, and just brush off the blood off of the bullets or the cartridge cases or the firearms. So it just depends on how much blood is there.
All right. And are you aware that in this case, Albuquerque Police Department claimed they could not identify this bullet that was recovered from Mr. Boyd's autopsy?
Objection, Your Honor, 401, 403.
And leading.
Stainless steel.
Did APD make a match of the autopsy that came from Mr. Boyd?
Same objection, Your Honor.
When you received the bullet, well, I'll ask you this. What is the first thing you had to do when you received the bullet that was removed from Mr. Boyd's deltoid before you could perform your analysis?
First thing I did was look under the microscope at it.
After you looked at it, what did you determine you needed to do in order to be able to do a comparison analysis?
I needed to clean it.
Did you do that?
Yes, ma'am.
Once you cleaned the bullet, were you able to make a positive identification as to which rifle fired this bullet?
In the end result, yes.
So now I want to figure out how you get there and what your end result was. You started to talk about the softness of the bullet when compared to a firearm. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. What are you comparing when you're looking at a firearm versus a bullet? How do you? Let's first talk. You talked about microscope comparison. How do you do that?
Well, first thing I do is I look, in this particular case, I looked at the test fires that were submitted between the 2 firearms, because there was fire bullets from both of the rifles that were in question.
Are those test fires?
They were test fires.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as 54 and admitted into evidence as States Exhibit 54 and 55, and ask you if these are the test comparisons you looked at when performing your ballistics evaluation in this case.
Yes, ma'am, they are.
And can you tell the jury which test cartridges came from which rifle?
That's your lack of foundation, Your Honor.
I'll lay some more foundation, yes. So we're talking about how you compare test rifles with the bullet, or test cartridges with the bullet, is that right?
Say that again, please.
Yes. Well, let me ask you this. Tell us, what is a microscope comparison?
Well, the first thing I do with as far as a microscope, that's my primary piece of equipment that I use for comparative analysis. And that's a large microscope joined together by a common bridge that allows me to look at objects side by side. And so what I do is I look at the test-fired bullets to each other to determine first if I can identify them to themselves, because if I can't do that, then obviously looking at the evidence is not going to help me any. So I was able to identify firearm 1 test-fired bullets to each other, and then I looked at firearm 2 bullets to each other and looked at what made those markings, those characteristics unique. So once I did that, then I did a comparative analysis of the bullet that was in question to the 2 firearms that were submitted for examination as far as the test fires.
How long has microscope comparison been available for use in ballistics?
In 1925, Philip Gravel introduced the comparison microscope. Came from the textile industry, and he was working with John Fisher and with Calvin Goddard, which basically is when the science was born in the United States. And so they introduced that microscope during the process, and that's been our primary piece of equipment since 1927. And of course, the equipment's much better now than it was in 1927, but it's a really good piece of equipment.
Now, you talked a little bit about doing the comparison between the bullet and the test shells. What are you looking for when you do your comparison?
Well, when I'm doing a comparison, I'm looking for a starting point. I'm looking for something that stands out on these bullets that says, hey, this is where you start. So I'm looking for a starting point, something unique, an individual characteristic that stands out that gives me a place to begin the examination. Once I get orientated with the bullet and the test fire bullet, then I start going around that bullet looking for agreement between the two, as far as I'm looking for individual characteristics, things that are unique to that rifle and not unique to the other rifle. So I had to look at both test fires and see which ones had that starting point. And so I was able to find the starting point, and then I was able to do my comparative analysis.
All right, are we talking about lands and grooves agreement?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell us about that. What are land and grooves? Down.
Land and grooves are in rifles and in pistols and in revolvers, are placed by the manufacturer into the barrels of firearms. And what that does is when that bullet goes down the barrel, remember when I talked about the bullet being softer than the gun, right? The firearm, right? So when that bullet goes down the barrel, it imparts a gyroscopic spin to the bullet. And that's just like watching a quarterback in football. He throws that football toward his receiver. That football is just straight and goes right to the person he's throwing it to. Same principle with the bullet going down the barrel. That bullet is stabilized in that barrel going toward its target. And when that bullet goes down that barrel, it's picking up individual characteristics, things that are unique to that firearm as it goes down the barrel. So that's what I look at, is those unique individual characteristics when I do a comparative analysis.
So if a barrel of a gun has 6 lands on it, about how many grooves would you expect to see?
It would be 6 lands.
I'm sorry?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. If the barrel of a rifle has 6 lands on it, how many landmarks would you expect to see on the bullet?
It would be 6.
In addition to landmarks, what else do you look for?
Well, I'm looking at lands and grooves on the bullets. And that's what I use that's all there is to look on the bearing surface of the bullet as far as comparative analysis when I'm doing the comparisons. So I'm looking for those individual characteristics on the groove impressions and on the land impressions of that bullet.
All right. So in this case, what were you asked to do?
I was asked to examine the bullet that was submitted and compare it to the 2 test fires from the 2 rifles that were in question to see if I could tell which rifle fired the submitted bullet.
All right. We talked earlier about States Exhibit 55 and 54 and States Exhibit 53, which have all been admitted into evidence, Your Honor, as 53B, the bullet removed from Mr. Boyd, and 55 and 54, which are test fires. Let me first ask you, Mr. Edwards, how did you get this evidence?
It was brought to me by Detective Jeff Stone.
When you received this evidence, did you maintain proper chain of custody?
Yes, ma'am. The evidence was booked into the Santa Ana Police Department and to their evidence room, and then they submitted it, and I had to go receive it from the evidence room.
The entire time that you had possession of this evidence, did you maintain chain of custody?
Yes, I did.
Now, may I again approach the witness? I'll show you 53B and ask you if you can identify your signature on 53B, which is the envelope with the bullet inside from Mr. Boyd.
Yes, ma'am. At the top of this envelope, you'll see red tape. And this is from the Santa Ana Police Department. It actually says Santa Anna on the tape, and also bears my initials, RE. And so when I'm working with the evidence, and once I reseal it, then it'll bear my initials on that envelope.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 54 and ask you the same question. What is that, and is your signature on that reflecting proper chain of custody?
Yes, ma'am. It shows my initials on the red tape as well, on this envelope, on this bag.
What is in that bag?
These are the test-fired cartridge cases and bullets fired through the submitted firearms, what we call firearm number 1.
Who did firearm 1 belong to?
Objection, lack of foundation.
But do you know who firearm 1 belonged to according to the ballistic reports that you received?
Objection, lack of foundation.
Ask me if he knows who.
This one belonged to,
The question was, do you know?
do I know? Yes, ma'am, I know.
Next question. Yes.
Who did it belong to?
Same objection, Your Honor.
What's his name?
All right. How do you know who this belonged to?
I know from, somebody told me.
All right. And did
Objection
you
based
also,
on hearsay, Your Honor. Lack of foundation.
There wasn't a question.
did you also review the ballistics from Albuquerque Police Department related to these test shells, sir?
Yes, I did. I reviewed their reports.
Is that something that you, as an expert in ballistics, regularly rely upon?
Yes.
And based on that review of the ballistics report from Albuquerque Police Department, who did these test casings, which rifle did they belong to?
Objection 703.
Can I have your approach? has been that identified from which firearm?
Exhibit 55 is from the firearm number 2.
Okay. When you were in possession of the test fires and the bullet that you have there in front of you, did you maintain proper chain of custody the entire time?
Yes.
All right. Once you cleaned the bullet that was recovered from the autopsy, what did you do next to compare it with the test fires from the weapons in front of you?
There again, I looked at the bullets from firearm number 1, the bullets from firearm number 2, to determine if they were identifiable to each other, to see if there was sufficient individual characteristics for comparison. Once I determined that, then I started comparing the bullet that was submitted in this envelope to the bullets from the envelope firearm 1, firearm 2, and then was able to find a starting point with firearm number 1.
All right. Can you tell us about that process, how you were able to find a starting point from these firearms?
I'm looking for the unique characteristics that are imparted onto the bullet from the test fires or from that rifle that that bullet was fired through. And once I found that characteristic that was unique to that firearm, then I looked on the actual bullet from the evidence that was submitted in this envelope right here, and that gave me a starting point on that land impression, and then I started working around that bullet, looking for unique characteristics, individual characteristics around the circumference of the bullet. And then as I look around the bullet, it's a cumulative type effect where I'm looking at it, and as I find more and more agreement, then I'm able to determine which firearm fired the submitted bullet.
Let me interrupt for 1 second, just so the record's clear. When you're referencing an envelope, will you identify it by exhibit number?
Yes, ma'am.
When you look at those envelopes or those bags with test fires, how many types of ammunition does it appear were used for the test fires?
There were 2 different brands. One was Spear and one was Federal.
Which firearm had which brand of ammunition?
Both envelopes had both brands in each envelope.
When you were doing your comparison, did you take any pictures of your process to assist the jury in explaining what you were doing?
Yes.
Tell us how you did that.
On the comparison microscope, there's a digital camera that is located and mounted on top of the microscope. And as I'm doing comparisons, and I can photograph the areas of agreement during the process of the examination.
Based on, well, did you reach a conclusion when you did your comparison microscope analysis?
Yes, during the comparison process, the bullet that was in Exhibit 53B,
Yes, sir.
I found agreement on 6 land impressions, 2 groove impressions, and was able to render the opinion that this bullet in the envelope 53B was fired in Exhibit 54, which was firearm number 1.
To further help explain what you were looking at to the jury, what steps did you take to help others look at your analysis that you did on the microscope?
Well, not only was photographs exposed of the comparisons once I found the areas of agreement of the individual characteristics. The evidence was also taken to Montreal to forensic technology, where they have a confocal microscope cameras, which actually is a HD 3D system, then allows a 3D rendering of the surface of the bullet and at the base of the bullet. And so the evidence was taken there by Detective Stone, and they imaged the evidence, and then he brought the evidence back to me, I believe it was on June 11th, 2015, for further analysis. And also the scans from the HD 3D system were sent to me and uploaded into a simulator, which they provided me to work with during the analysis process.
Did you ultimately get those images and put them into a PowerPoint in order to assist in explaining your process and your results.
Objection needed, Your Honor.
What did you do with the images that you received from Montreal?
I use those during the comparison process as far as looking for agreement, as I'm seeing on the conventional microscope as well as on the HD3D. And the HD3D has got certain advantages over the comparison microscope. It has some disadvantages too. The advantages are the object that you're looking at is always in focus, and no matter how you zoom in and out, it's always in focus. It also takes that bullet and flattens it completely out so I can see the entire surface of the bullet from one linear aspect. And that was actually a principle that was started back in the 1950s. But anyway, they've done it now with the digital cameras where confocal, as far as the process is concerned, where I can actually look at that linear picture as well as the actual rotating of the digital image from the bullet.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibit number 51 and ask you if these fairly and accurately show the process and the stages of your examination from your analysis in this case.
Yes, these are all images that I generated during the examination process.
Do those images help you to explain precisely how you made a positive bullet match in this case?
This shows a process as far as starting points and areas of agreement that I saw during the comparison process.
Your Honor, State moves into evidence, States 51.
Your Honor, object lack of foundation in 703. If you need further explanation, I'm happy to provide.
Concur.
Motion.
Brianna, may I have you switch this to podium HDMI? All right.
The third time.
I'm sorry.
You guys actually step.
We stepped on it?
Yeah, it's a search wall.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry? Oh. Sure. Just looking. Unplug and replug here. Plug it all the way. Let's see.
Your Honor, if you would try rebooting the system, maybe that would.
When I rebooted, did you hear it click on?
Oh.
I did.
Yes. It was heard to click on. Super slides. Extend. All right, we'll just use the printout, though. I hate to do that. Let's see.
You want to try this one?
Yeah.
You want VGA?
Where is-
Still HDMI. It is her computer.
I'm gonna try it from the defense desk or something. There we go. All right, do you want to just pull? Actually, I can just do it from here. Perfect, thank you. All right. Mr. Edwards, can you tell us what we're looking at here in your legend to help us as we proceed through this imagery?
Yes, as you go through the PowerPoint, the blue diamond represents photographs generated by the conventional comparison microscope, using a comparison microscope. The orange diamond represents the HD 3D IBIS virtual comparison microscope that I used during the working with the 3D.
All right. I'm going to go to the first slide here. I don't know if the jury can see it, but can you tell us can you orient us to this slide here, please?
Yes. Remember when I was talking about how the bullets are stretched out in a flat image? That's what's represented on the left side of this picture.
Can you point
Okay.
to that on your screen or
Sure.
draw a line through that? Or
Yeah,
show
this
us-
area right there.
Okay.
Now, up at the top, up here, I don't know if that marked or
You just
not.
draw with your finger. You can make a circle. There you
Anyway,
go.
up at the top, starting on the left side, is your test fire 1 from firearm 1. test fire 2 from firearm 1, and then the red is test fire 1 from firearm 2, test fire 2 from firearm 2, and then the actual evidence on the last portion of this right here. Now, when it's lit up green at the top, that means that's what's being represented in the picture on the right side. In this area here where you see kind of like the purple lines right here, that's the area that I'm looking at. So this area right here is actually what's represented right here.
And tell us, it says TF1 and TF2 and FA1 up at the top. Tell us what that means.
FA1 is firearm 1, which is represented from the package Exhibit 54. Test fire 1 and test fire 2 are the two test fires that were imaged in Montreal by forensic technology. This is a land impression here that you're looking at, where it says land impression number 1. So when I found my starting point, then that's where I started the analysis, and that's also where I started naming the land impression number 1. So that's my starting point, land impression number 1.
All right, so what does that tell you based on this land impression number 1?
Well, this area here is land impression number 1. This is a land impression, and I'm looking at the microscopic agreement between the shoulder here and the shoulder here. And so I see agreement up in here. Also, as I'm coming down and looking at this image, and I'm seeing all the characteristics that are in agreement between the two. So this is where the two test fires are, where I'm saying I compare the test fires to see if I see agreement. That's where I'm starting at. This is my starting point.
Okay. And if you click on the bottom left-hand corner twice of your screen, it'll erase your previous marks. I need to go a little lower. There you go.
All right.
Tell us what we're looking at here.
Okay, so firearm 1, firearm 2, land impression number 1 is a starting point. So there again we have lit up at the top green, firearm 1, test fire 1, firearm 2, test fire 1, and also you notice that over here on the right side is evidence is lit up green. So now I'm looking at all three of these images together, which is another advantage of this type of system. So I can look at more than one example. Whereas a comparison microscope, I can only look at 2. So I have test fire 1, I have test fire 2, and now I have the bullet where it says autopsy, and this is land impression number 1, and you'll see the agreement coming through here as far as between the 3 different images represented here.
All right. Now you said this is something that you're able to see on the 3D microscope. Were you able to make the match from the conventional microscope?
Yes, actually, this is only a supplemental way of looking at evidence. In other words, when I'm doing a comparison, I have to be able to see it on a conventional microscope before I can make an identification. So if I see it only on the 3D and I don't see it on the conventional microscope, I can't consider that. When I see it on both, then that helps as far as taking images and showing a representation of what I saw during the comparison.
So we see on this next slide that there's agreement between these marks that you've shown us. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Tell us what we're looking at here that was significant to you in your analysis.
Well, this is just actually as far as the starting point number 1. This is the evidence bullet, land impression number 1, and then you can see where I got 3 diamonds here. I've got 2 orange diamonds. I got 1 blue. That means I took 2 images of the land impression number 1 with 3D, and I took 1 with a conventional microscope.
Okay. Which one shall I click on to help you explain this to the jury?
Go ahead and click on the blue one.
Okay. Oops. Oh, I lost it. Let's see. I lost the little ability to click on those. gonna go back to your slide. All right. Have I lost it completely? It's going away, Mike, here. I'm trying to just get back to the slideshow.
It was,
Okay, this one?
I'm gonna start at the beginning.
Okay.
I'm gonna start here.
Okay.
To show the show.
Right.
There we go. Oh. We've lost our signal here, though, Judge. Maybe it's this.
Oops.
Sorry. That's it. Oh.
Okay, maybe Andre can.
Andre? Andre.
Are we on 17?
No, stop. All right. That's okay. All right, we need to get to this slide right here in regular show.
But here's the problem with the court equipment, maybe you can set up our projector and our screen and use that instead, or?
I don't know if it's the court equipment or not.
Okay.
Well, we have it here, and it's attached. It's just not on the other.
You want to try it?
Yeah, we can take a project break, you can set up the screen and the projector and just project it off.
Do it on
the
our
screen
own
projector. That
screen?
may be an easier way to do this.
You're gonna be able to manage with the witness. And the benefit of the court's equipment is the witness has it at their stand, the jury has it where they can see it, and counsel has it where they can.
I'm thinking what we can do is have the witness come around and just point out things on the screen.
Hang on, let me
And
see.
counsel will have to move again, but that's, we can't get the equipment to work, that may be easier than trying to make it the first.
I'm just trying to shut down and start.
Let's take 5 minutes.
Thank you, Judge.